So hi everyone, Mel Bartels here. Title of my presentation is, The Answer is 42. So before I begin, I want to say hi to Roger and Chuck and others I've not seen in a long time just because of life and COVID and other people who are there. And really wish I was there in person so I could see Chris's beautiful 34-inch. And if not able to look through the eyepiece, just imagine how wonderful the views might be. Chris said something really interesting in that compared to the challenge of building his 20-inch, the 34-inch he found was night and day harder, more complex and longer to do. And since I do not have a 42-inch to show you, and I'm not sure that I can build one, I'm going to talk about the obstacles and challenges, keeping in mind what Chris just said in the previous talk. So here's Steve Swayze with his 40-inch f5. Thought I'd start with him because he passed on recently, and a real loss to me because I found him such a bold and creative telescope maker. But he made the mirror and the scope himself. I got to participate a little bit along with his brother Bruce carrying the mirror, as it was quite heavy for the three of us through the door, and then we'd roll it down the carpeted hallway to the end of the hallway and propped up against the wall and walk way back to the Ronchi tester and see if the figuring session had made progress or not. And of course, when he would bring the scope to a star party, he had no lack of an army of people coming to just begin putting up the scope despite whatever Steve might wish or not wish about the assembly. Dan Backen has a 41-inch. This is his second iteration. With the ladder there, showing you a little bit about the immensity and the scale of these telescopes. So he too made the mirror himself, having progressed up through 27-inch and then I believe a 33 before he did the 41. Here's a group of people who made a 40-inch mirror. I believe Jeff Baldwin, a member of the Oregon Scope Works, supplied the blank. I'm not sure how far along it was. And then this group here finished it off. I'm really attracted to this scope design. You can see that it uses a large flat that's tilted, and the eyepiece then is more at eye level there. It looks really usable and compact and buildable and very tempting to think that, you know, might be able to make a 40 or a 1 meter type telescope. And then Chris's scope is a fixture at the Oregon Star Party most every year. And that's, by the way, is a 10-inch, I believe, a cave scope sitting there next to it. Group 70 has been working on this 70-inch mirror for, I believe, a whole lifetime now. I remember going down in the 70s or 80s and watching them figure the mirror, which you can see on the right-hand side there. So they have the mirror finished and they're working on the mounting. I'm not sure they figured out quite where they're going to site the scope yet. And then this is a really intriguing scope from Italy, Fabio. This is a 1-inch meniscus and he ground this mirror himself. It also features a tilted or what sometimes is called a lowrider design here. A massive telescope, but that is a 1-inch meniscus, I think is very impressive and very inspiring. Yeah, and so that is the list of people I know that have made 1 meter mirrors and the scopes to go with it. There's lots of people who have, well, relatively speaking, who have purchased large mirrors and maybe made the scope. But in terms of making the mirror and the scope, that's what I know. So what I'm showing here is how I think about designing telescopes. So this all started for me with Richard Schwartz in LA sending me the faceplate of a cellular mirror. He had acquired a patent or two on putting the cellular mirrors together, and his ultimate conclusion was that they're rather fragile And he didn't see that there was really a future in that for amateurs. So he sent me the faceplate. That became my F3 zip dog. And at about the same time, the AltAz initiative was starting with the goal of 1 to 2 meter telescopes. And so I thought I would embark on a long project to see at what point I could, or what size I could go to before it just wouldn't work anymore. So I made it up to 30. I don't know if the 42s will work, but here's my design philosophy. So if you imagine at low power, your 50x 2-degree field of view, and you have a 12-inch scope, with the proper eyepiece, you can match the scope's exit pupil to your eye's pupil at 7 millimeters. Now, if you take the 12-inch scope there on the bottom and scoot over and go to high power, let's say 175 power, with a little more than half-degree field of view, the exit pupil coming from the telescope shrinks to 2 millimeters, but your eye is still 7 millimeters. So wouldn't it be neat if we could somehow pump in the light, squeeze in the aperture to bring that pupil back up to what your eye could handle? And it would indeed take maybe a 40-inch scope to do that. So wouldn't you prefer a 40-inch scope at 175 power over a 12-inch scope, all being equal? And the answer is I would. So yes, you are using the 40-inch at not necessarily its maximum resolution, but for 175 power, a little over half-degree of field, you're pumping in the maximum amount of light you possibly can. So that's my thinking. Another way I look at it is how much aperture do I dare squeeze in to the focal length, knowing that solely the focal length in the eyepiece determines the true field and magnification. So stuffing in more aperture makes for a brighter and a more low power-ish field from the aperture's perspective. But since focal length and eyepiece do not change, then neither does the field and magnification. So that's how I'm looking at it. And the reason for attempting the 42 above the successful 30-inch. So here we are with the birth of the 42s. My contribution to David Davis's home-built kiln and his slumping and annealing prowess was to supply the precision molds. The reason precision molds are important to me is that the tabletop glass we're using is just 3/4 of an inch thick. So that's frighteningly thin. And if there are any defects, spalling or bubbles or whatever, that has to be ground out and further reduces thickness to become, even more frighteningly thin. So as it is, the 30-inchers turn out to be about 5/8 of an inch thick. And it looks like with the two 42-inch blanks that I have, they'll have a similar thickness or thinness to them. You can look down on the lower left and you'll see Jerry Oltian, who's the telescope making editor at Sky Telescope, and I working on the two plaster tools. And so there is a sequence to this. You start with a wooden form, pour some plaster over that. Then you pour some more plaster to match up against that first plaster. And then you set about grinding the two plaster blanks with rough grit to make them spherical. Once you do that and you clean up the mess, you then cast a refractory blank, which you can see there at the top. That bottom blank is actually about a 32-inch and the top one's about a 44 because they have to be a little bit bigger than the glass, of course. That then becomes proofed in the kiln, and hopefully the blank or the slumped blank that the glass goes over survives all that. And if it works, you'll, on the right-hand side, you get a 30-inch in the back and the 42-inch there. However, one of the 42s, when David was eating dinner and it was in the kiln, blew up. And even though his shop is disconnected from his house, a short distance away, he could hear the explosion at dinner time. So David is like, oh, I think I know what that is. And sure enough, the glass had shattered. So as Chris said, going up in size becomes much more difficult, exponentially so. And it turns out that that was the case in the kiln also, that getting to 42 is just big enough and has enough curvature to it, getting it to move up in temperature and back down again and so forth without just grossly shattering is a challenge to overcome. So I actually had 3 42-inch blanks, 2 of which were slumped successfully by David. And on the lower right is David and me beginning some coarse rough grinding. Since David offered to help before I put the blanks in the car and drove home, I said, well, yes. And so here we are pushing it back and forth. And David is showing how strong he is because he's able to push faster at me than I could push back at him. So here I am with 2 42-inch f2.8 blanks, 3/4 of an inch thick. They have begun some rough grinding. You can see some patches in there that haven't quite caught up yet. The back side has to be ground, and then the front side too. That's on top of my grinding machine that I built that I used in the 25 and the 2 30-inch blanks. So these would be my 7th and 8th ultra-thin meniscus mirrors. Again, they're about 5/8 inch thick, 42 inches diameter, makes about a 67:1 diameter thickness ratio. Previously, I've made a 16-inch by 3/8 inch mirror. That's about a 43:1. The 30-inch mirror is about a 48:1 diameter thickness ratio. The 25-inch f2.6 was about a 50:1 ratio. And then some smaller mirrors that I started off with. But look at the weight on those mirrors. You know, the 25-inch mirror is 25 pounds, the 30-inch mirrors, they're 38 pounds each. It's so wonderful to be able to take these mirrors that are so lightweight off and on the pitch lap into the test stand and back and forth. You know, it's almost to the point where the mirrors are so lightweight that you can become cavalier about it and drop one. So just a monumental magnitude less weight to them. The 42s weigh about 82 pounds. And so that's starting to get a little heavy. Their bulk is a problem though. It's not just the 82 pounds that you're lifting, it's that you're lifting them almost 2 feet out away from you. So that's a challenge. Besides the challenge of handling them, that I'm probably going to have to do some type of lift or some mechanism to move them about. We also have the bending. So naively, if you just look at simple engineering formulas like you might learn in Engineering 101, you just take the radius to the 4th power, divide by the thickness squared, and you get these relative numbers. And you can see there on the left, the 10-inch and 13-inch. Relatively flexible, but actually the blanks are quite stiff and they work quite successfully on a 3-point back flotation system, unlike actually a standard thickness 12-inch where at high power you can actually see the deformation slightly by the 3 points and you need to go to a 9-point support. 13-inch did not need that. The 16-inch, which I'll show you in a minute, and then now we begin to get up into this exponential. The 25 and 30s were very floppy. They took a lot of effort on the test stand to get meaningful results from them. The mirror cells and edge support, as it turns out, are not that difficult, but they did need a little bit of experimenting to figure out how to be successful with them. But oh my gosh, look at the 42s. If I think the 25 and 30 was astonishingly flexible and made grotesque ronchograms until I properly supported them, what am I going to do about the 42s? They're 2.5, 3 times worse than the 30. But wait, that's not the sum of the issues. So on the right-hand side, you'll see my 16-inch 25 and the 2 30-inchers. It just happens to work out that the thickness of the blanks is about equal to their sagitta, meaning that if I very carefully support the mirror at their center of gravity, it matches the back edge of the mirror and it just works. And that seems to be kind of a magic formula there. The 42s would be the first time where I can't do that. the center of gravity of the mirror will actually be behind the back edge. And so that is an unknown extrapolation. We'll have to see when we get there if there's some type of mechanical answer to overcoming that. So, final scope then. So up to this point, I've convinced you that the 42s and scaling to the 30s is a monumental, more difficult answer, problem in front of us. But let's just go ahead and pretend we're going to make two 42s and they match. Maybe we should consider a 1 meter final scope. And so on the left is what the scaling might be. And, you know, the footprint's 4 feet by 8 feet. So, you know, that's kind of an issue. On the right, if you see my circled secondary size down there on the far lower right, it's about 13 inches. So that's a challenge. There's a interesting proposal by Clive out of Australia to use divergent eyepieces where the eyepieces do not completely overlap, but in fact, they're tilted slightly. His idea is to take advantage of the divergent view, if you will, of your eyes with your nose and overlap them that way. And so it is just barely possible to get two of the low power wide angle eyepieces side by side and still fit into the interpupillary distances that most of us have. And so in my Nuke Designer, I have a binoscope design page where you can play with the divergence of that and so on. Another potential is to put the two mirrors side by side and have one at low power and one at high power and just jump back and forth. And yes, you are wasting the view of one mirror when you look through the other one. On the other hand, if it's a clear night and you're not observing, well, you're wasting those photons too. So, you know, I can rationalize this back and forth. But there is a new kid on the block, night vision devices. So Ed Allen brought his, and we used it on Howard's 30-inch, which is f2.7 and a silver primary. And as Howard would say, oh my gosh, it's not just that the view is amplified, it's a whole new experience. I was really concerned that it might not be aesthetically or subjectively a visual experience, but it's a very visual experience looking through that. And the beauty is that you can set the gain down to 1. There's essentially no scintillation. And on the left is a drawing of the pelican with the 30-inch, with my 30-inch. And I'm in particular looking at the end of those black lanes for the star forming regions. And I couldn't quite see them from my home here, but when we took the night vision device and put it on, oh my gosh, you could see the heads glowing and you could see the sides of those black lanes glowing too. And I've processed this image here to indicate a little bit about, to match up with my visual memory of what it was like to look through this night vision device. So having just looked through Jerry Oldham's 12-inch binoculars and enjoyed those a lot, you know, a monocular night vision device might be the way to go here. Scaling. Yeah, so this is to attempt to convince you that scaling is a real issue if we didn't quite believe Chris tried. So on the upper left is Steve Swayze with his 30-inch. Then next to it is a 30-inch f6. Down below that is the 30-inch f4, which is now at Sun River Observatory. And then my 30-inch, which I've tried at f2.7, at least if I'm on my tiptoes to be able to reach the eyepiece without a ladder. So you already begin to see there's scaling issues hurting us or affecting us at the 30-inch mark. But now look on the right-hand side, you know, you think the 40 to 30, well, it's a 4:3 ratio. The scaling would be just, you know, a little bit harder, but it's a lot harder. You can see Steve way up there on a 16-foot ladder, and Dan Backen's 41-inch with that huge ladder next to it. And now, did I mention that the Project 40 scope was very ergonomic and very attractive? It hides a lot of the scaling issues and puts the eyepiece more at a comfortable standing height. So we have those scaling issues to worry about. More scaling issues. So in the upper left, I'm grinding one of the 30-inchers on the tool. I'm actually grinding the backside, and you can see the other 30-inch sitting there. I would alternate back and forth every 15 minutes or so that the two 30-inchers matched exactly. Part, I should say, of doing the two 30-inchers was a hypothesis that, in my experience, at least the way I make mirrors, it always seems like I have to parabolize them twice. The first time turns out to be a learning experience, and then the second time I just sail right through, and it's like, oh yeah, this mirror, you know, no problem at all. Wonderful experience the second time through. First time though, you really struggle with the learning curve. And sure enough, with the 230s, I had to be disciplined enough so that whatever I did to the first mirror, I did to the second mirror. Even when I did a quick test, and I promised myself I would never test the first mirror without doing the second one, but I would do it anyhow. And then I go, oh my gosh, this figuring session made the mirror worse. And now I've got to go make the second mirror worse in order to optimize the overall production that I'd be able to do two mirrors at once. So it did turn out that I was able to successfully do the two 30-inchers in about just a little bit more than the effort of one mirror. But notice the 30-inchers, they're 38 pounds each, and I can push those back and forth just fine by hand. But you recall in the earlier slide, it took David Davis and I, and he's a strong guy, both of us to push a 42 back and forth. And when you make mirrors, and if you make a large mirror, and you follow my technique of mirror on top of full-size tool, because that automatically supports the mirror, and you make everything super regular to avoid astigmatism. Now you have this tool, and this is a tool for the 30-inch, and it weighed well over 100 pounds, lifting it on and off to clean off between the grits and so forth was not the easiest thing. So I calculate the weight of the tool, if I were to naively follow the same scaling on the 42, is going to be somewhere between 200 and 300 pounds. So obviously, either I pour the tool right on the grinding machine and I never move it again, or I have to figure out some type of new design, you know, maybe filling up the foam or filling up the plaster with pieces of foam or something. I don't know. But then I also have to get on the far right, I have to get the mirror into the test stand, which means testing it the same way I'm going to support it. So here's the test stand for the 30-inchers. Has 18-point back support and a sling. I have to be able to slip the mirror in there. So it becomes a testing challenge too. In the lower left, I used a 1/4-inch Baltic birch on the 30-inch, and these turned out to be extremely lightweight and extremely rigid structures. I was just impressed. They only weigh a few pounds each, so I'm just able to lift them up. But I don't know if I could scale that on the 42s. One thing I'll say, since the war in Ukraine started, the Baltic birch quality has gone, well, downhill. And for me, it's pretty warped. And the void, or the material in the middle, yeah, I've just had a lot of struggle on the 16-inch. Put in way too many hours to make the precision cuts at the angled joints and so forth. So I don't know if I'll do a wood telescope again. Applefly not being available last I checked. It's hard to know where to turn to. I'll talk a bit more about that in a minute. So down below that then, so I'm used to full-size tools. You know, I've developed techniques with hot air guns to soften the pitch so I can do pressing with the large mirrors on top. Even so, it can be a challenge of a lot of time. And of course, as the mirror changes figure and it acquires parabolization, that changes and you have to press it all the time. And so pressing these large mirrors becomes a real challenge. But wait, there are more challenges than that. If you look to the lower right, What are we doing about focusers? You know, I actually took a moonlight focuser off an old scope of mine for the 16-inch. And so we're going to have to come up with new ideas of focusers. This is Pierre Lemay's Helico Crawford focuser, a wonderful design. It uses the tube of the coma corrector as the tube, and you can slide them up and down, or you can rotate them for very fine focus control. This is with a 3-inch coma corrector there, and I have that as an option on my 30-inch if I ever choose to put a digital camera with a large chip on there. And then finally, question mark, dollar sign, or dollar sign question mark. So I lost exact track of the 30-inch cost, but I think making the mirrors and a scope maybe cost me $1,000 or $1,500, certainly under $2,000. But can I do that for the 42s? I mean, where do I even get the secondaries from? So the costing factor begins to grow exponentially on you at some point, no matter how ingenious or how much you do it yourself. So those are some of the challenges that I see. So in the future, I may just go back and do an all aluminum tube assembly. This is my 20-inch tri-dob where I used aluminum struts in the upper end. I could do the same to the mirror box and indeed the rocker and the base if it came to it. And I have a couple more challenges. Well, the first challenge is a 30-inch. So how can a 30-inch be possibly a challenge to the 42? And the answer is that the 30 is working really well. And it's a tussle between Mel and observer mode and Mel and telescope building mode. I'd much rather be looking through a 30-inch and enjoying the views than being frustrated over some scaling problem with the 42-inch. So the 30-inch turned out far more successful than I anticipated, and it's kind of a problem now because my motivation to doing the 42s is less. And then on the right is my 16-inch that I'm working on right now, and I'll show you that here in just a minute. But this has turned out to be just a neat little scope. And I don't mean to sound like 16 is a small scope, but you know, in this lightweight zip-top design of mine that folds up, it is just a small scope. You just fold it up and walk away with it. The whole scope looks to be about 25 pounds, you know, and it's a wonderful little small scope for me. So I still have some time to finish this, struggling through the challenges of holding the wood flat while I'm cutting the angles in it and trying to get the edges to match up and so forth. So the 16-inch. So the future is what we create. Before I do questions though, let me end the sharing. There we go. And if you want to make me full screen, I just wanted to show you real quickly where I'm at. So there is a 16-inch on the table in the background. And then there is the 30-inch there. Remember, that's become an obstacle to the 42s now. And in the back is, where are we? Oh, it's hidden a little bit, but the grinding machine and the 42s. So at this point, I'll conclude my presentation and ask for people to volunteer even more challenges and obstacles that I can't think of, or that await me on my path to whatever. Now, I told myself philosophically a long time ago that there will be some cutoff point in the curve where, you know, the mirror just won't work. And it'll be worthy to find out what that point is. You know, I didn't really know that the 30s would work. I really gave them maybe a 50-50. After the 25, I was just relieved I could even get to 25 inches and have it work. So, but still, if I were to attempt the project and fail, it's still, you know, devastating to fail, even though philosophically I can pat myself on the back and go, well, now you know the failure point. So yes, I know scientists say that a failed experiment is still a success, but that doesn't mean it doesn't hurt. So, so tell me more challenges and stuff that I'm overlooking. Tell me that I've, just total pie in the sky panacea on this one.
Dan has a question for you.
My first question is, what are you preparing us for?
Did you hear that?
Yes, what am I preparing you for? Well, preparing you for, gosh, I wish you could look through the 30-inch, Howard's or mine, because the views are really astonishing. But if that's as far as we get, then that's as far as we get, and it'll be really wonderful. So it is strange, I have to say, giving a presentation on something I haven't done yet. Normally I build it first and then I can say, see, this works. And, well, that didn't work, so I would do it differently the next time. So it is a little strange doing a presentation on something I haven't done. So, so yeah, what I'm saying is that's the thinking in my head, and those are the challenges I'm focused on trying to figure out how to overcome.
Well, I have another question. You showed the one slide where the CG was back behind the edge of the mirror. And you must have some ideas how to solve that. I was wondering if you could elaborate or think on it, or we could think on it.
So Dan Gray's question is, because the center of gravity of the mirror is behind the back of the edge, surely I have thought of wonderful, well, I'm elaborating on your question now. Surely I've thought of wonderful engineering. Yeah, I haven't. I suspect trying to support it at the edge is going to fail. It's just a feeling. I'm surprised that the 30 inches and the 25, work with the slings. I think there's something unexpectedly useful out of the meniscus shape when you do support them right at the center of gravity, where they tend to be relatively stiff, a little bit more, not claiming huge amounts, but just enough more to succeed. The mirror does not flop over when you're pointed near the horizon. The star tests show good star images down there, which I was surprised. I was totally ready to accept that the 30 inchers would not work near the horizon, but that's not proved to be the case. So what to do with the 42s, I don't know. The best I can think of is to try supporting them at the center, which I did on the 30 inchers as an experiment, and that seemed to work. So what I mean by supporting at the back center is I just stuck on a hub and hung it and let the mirror settle in on the backside and looked up at Polaris. And that was a good, nice round star test image at high power. I did not tip that down to the horizon. So another idea is to maybe find, like, say, the 70% zone of the mirror and glue on some support wires, maybe 4 of them, 2 above and 2 below, and support the mirror that way from the backside. I suspect that the mirror being so thin, you're going to begin to see, what would you call it, this torquing of the mirror surface, which I have seen before in some cells where it feels like the mirror sticks to the backside. And then as you tip the mirror down, it actually flexes the glass kind of out and back around those points. So I don't have a go-to engineering solution for that as of yet, but if you have ideas, you have at least a year to submit them before the mirror might be ready. But actually, I'm not going to be able to parabolize the mirror unless I support it properly either. So I may face this sooner than later. And in fact, I have actually thought about just flash polishing the mirrors and playing around with supporting them before I would actually get into fully polishing them out and so on. So what do you think, Dan? You have any ideas?
Yeah, but I don't know if it's rooted in experience or knowledge. But my idea is a ring at that CG point with supports every so often. Right.
Well, as long as you can imagine that as you point the mirror horizontal, the mirror is going to want to hang on that support point. And so it's going to want to flex and bend backward underneath it. So it almost begs for more points to balance that all out. How that actually works out, without FEA to run and simulate, it's hard to say. I will put in a word, though, that these tools like Plop, I use them, and they are a generation improvement. I mean, it's just order of magnitude better. Knowledge is a lot less guessy, but still, I think that there's a lot of room within what the analyses show us for people to go out like me and experiment and see what you find out. It can be a surprise, and a lot of, well, that's just not going to work. Just, look at the study. Well, someone needs to go and try it. And, when David Davis did his 16-inch by 3/8-inch thick mirror, I didn't think that would work. I mean, go run the analysis on it. You go, oh, that mirror is going to deform. I forget what it was, half wave or something. But he built a mirror cell, which was essentially a grid of kind of plastic-sized marshmallow support points that the mirror stuck on, and it performed beautifully. It was actually that mirror that turned me into thinking these ultra thin, high diameter to thickness ratio mirrors would work. And let me just grab the mirror here real quick.
You'll be next. He can't hear you. He's too far. He's way in the back of his shop. Yeah.
Okay, so here's the mirror. It just weighs 7 pounds, and it's just 3/8 of an inch thick, and it's really just doing what David Davis did, like what, 12 years ago, and maybe the mirror that he affectionately named Fuzzy, didn't have exactly the highest precise super low wavelength figure on it, but the star test was regular, and that's what astonished me. And that's what this mirror is. I star tested it quite a bit. And in some ways, this glass is super flexible. I have done zones just by pressing my hand, working methodically around it. That is a wonderful way to do these thin mirrors, unexpected advantage. And they seem to have a certain rigidity overall to them that's a little unexpected. But but I'm not sanguine as to when you scale it up to a 42 of the magnitude of the problem here. But I will say in this little 16-inch size, it's just a wonderful experience working on this mirror and dealing with this. So Rob Brown, are you there? You want to add anything to these?
Thanks, Mel. I wanted to just support you on the center support. Having tried it myself on a 16-inch, it seemed to really solve my mount problems at the time. And I've since learned how to use an edge strap on my 16-inch. I have that here with me and people have seen it, but I am still pretty serious about going to a bonded on puck in the center to hold the mirror from falling vertically, as well as keeping it from falling out of the telescope, which I know what that feels like. But the center support thing, I don't know, at 42, yeah, it's a whole new ball game. And at least I've got another data point for you. It works.
So for those who couldn't hear, Rob Brown is basically saying that on his 16, he's tried a center support point and he found that it works. And you're using interferometry. I'm just using a star test and looking for the regular nice roundness of out of focus.
Rob's doing star testing as well.
Yeah, but Rob has also done interferometry of that, right, Rob?
No.
He's saying no.
Oh, okay, because otherwise, you're relying on my subjective experience, which I would humbly put out in front of you. I don't like bloated or oblong or weird looking star images. I hate that. So, but again, this is back to we tend to believe what we see. So unless you look through the scope, I understand if you don't reluctant to believe me, but I do care about the star images, and at least from the sense that, well, that's what you see when you look through the eyepiece anyhow at high power. So the stars will go through the snap focus, and the star test pattern looks good inside and outside. What more could you want, from a practical viewpoint. But I don't have any IF data to support the center hub approach myself at the time.
Yeah,
Hey,
Rob's going to get
Mel,
up closer now.
I'm just getting up close here, Mel, for you. One of the things that you pointed out was testing it in its cell, right? And that's super important. I brought mine here so people can look. What was super instructive to me was stopping when the mirror is spherical. In fact, you even said flash polish, good enough.
Mhm.
That's where you start testing your mounting system and learning how to mount your mirror. So what I've done, because it is spherical, it's very easy to create an artificial star using a little laser diode. I've got it sitting right there. And if you want to see it again, I'll show it to you. Laser diodes emit a very tiny point of light that's at or below the diffraction limit of your scope. And then you can bring that right back and look at it in an eyepiece and see all sorts of problems. I have been fighting astigmatism. Now I've got that mostly under control, and I can see a hexagonal pattern because I'm using a 6-point support. So these are the kinds of things that, as a beginning telescope maker, have been very instructive. And as you go into 42-inch land, these kinds of techniques, I think, are going to be very helpful to the most experienced. Thank you.
Right, and I'll also say that, if you do the calculations, the artificial star distance for 42-inch f2.8 is like miles away. It doesn't matter. I can just put it at the end of my shop. And so what if it shows horrible spherical aberration? That's actually good because it's, showing me what the outer part of the mirror is doing. Does it come down to a nice little circular ring before it collapses to a point or not? And, I have enough experience to know that, in terms of gross low order spherical aberration, the human eye is pretty good. Quarter wave, even eighth wave, that's pretty objectionable. So, if I can meet that standard. So, I'm quite okay with using the artificial star, as Rob is saying, just a few dozen feet away from the primary.
Yeah, Richard.
You have been developing techniques and then carefully taking 20 or 30% jumps in aperture. So as to preserve as much knowledge from one step to the next and make use of that. But as you point out, it's going to break down at some point because you're always dealing with squares and cubes of the aperture and creating, mass problems and flexion problems and so forth. What do you think, what would you speculate the guaranteed failure aperture would be to continue this kind of technology? You're gambling that a 40 is good enough, high enough chance it will work that you're willing to put in the effort and time. Where do you think you'd say, I know from where I've gone, it's just not going to happen at say 60 inches? Where do you think that aperture would be?
Yeah, so Richard's question is, I have been going methodically up through apertures, and this is not the sequence that I've done it in, but I've done 6 and 10 and 13 and 16 and 25 and 30 and now the 42s. And this has cost me years to do this at a slow pace, but I will say that it's turned out to be an optimal pace because every jump in aperture has confronted me with 2, if not 3, major problems that I've struggled. And luckily, between all of our brains, been able to overcome. So Richard's question really is, when do I anticipate that to fail? So I look at the optimistic side, and I see what David Davis did with his 60-inch, slumped to F3 or something like that, about 1 inch thick. The 42s work. And the scaling, or we overcome and we get this breakthrough where we can support the mirror adequately, even though the center of gravity is no longer on the mirror's edge anymore. Why would a 60 fail? I mean, why would a 72 fail? I mean, I see a breakthrough to those sizes. I doubt it'll be me working on those. That's just not where I'm at in my life. But and I will say that there is a lot of experience in dealing with these problems. I can't give a presentation on every little issue that you come up. The best I could do would be to look over your shoulder while you're paralyzing and say, oh yeah, well, you're facing this problem and this is how you overcome it. Oh yeah, so here's another problem. And so there's like an unlimited number of these little problems that you just learn to overcome, and they become part of your knowledge. Or you're doing this so different, like Rob Brown with his machine polishing. I can tell you kind of what I did by hand, but you know, Rob's on his own when he's trying to do his 16-inch, the exact clone of mine.
I don't know my hand from now on.
Yeah, you know, what the machine is there, I've concluded, is to help push it back and forth. But yeah, so at what point on the optimistic viewpoint, I don't see if the 42s work, why a 60 or 72 wouldn't work, except that now you're far past the one person and now you're in the project. And when you do a 60 or 72-inch mirror, if not a 40-inch mirror, you are running a project. And the foremost business you are in is completing that project. The fact that it has to do with a telescope mirror and a telescope is immaterial to the fact that you're dealing with a project. And to not mince words, you better get your project back together and know what it means to manage project, what project management is all about, and to navigate that successfully. Otherwise, even if you succeed technically, you will fail at the project level, because this involves humans and building teams and focusing on goals and accomplishing stuff collaboratively and working over all those multitude of project failure points that can happen in a project. So one thing, so again, when you scale up, now you get to 60 and 72, it's not a person anymore. This is a project. So look at the group 70, you know, where have been their experiences with figuring a mirror with, you know, multiple people and multiple opinions and what to do for your next figuring action. At least with me, I have only me to blame, but if someone else were working on the mirror with me and that didn't work out, well, as I would tell my staff at work before I retired, before we begin a project, we must always identify a project scapegoat. Do not start a project until you know who your scapegoat's going to be. And I would do that for a couple of reasons. One of them was to actually identify, help people understand what the failure would be and what the critical point would be to get past that. That's, you know, your scapegoat. So, you know, if you're figuring a mirror with a partner and that figuring stroke goes bad, well, it's clearly your partner's fault. He'll say the same thing. It's his partner's fault, you know, so, but how do you get past that? So it becomes a project management issue when you get to those sizes too, let alone a technical issue.
Hey, Mel, got a question for you.
Yes.
Yeah, back to your, this is Ed here. Back to your original question about scaling. What about moving the scope, the 42 or 42 bino? How were you going to do that besides out your garage door or shop door beyond that? And I guess the second question is, how does the addition of night vision, how does that affect your quest in that, because it's not the same thing as direct visual, but it is a way of doubling to quadrupling the effective aperture of scopes, even though it's not quite the same thing.
Right. So I'm glad you asked that, Ed, because if the 42s don't succeed, you are my scapegoat.
Very good.
Thanks for volunteering.
Because it's your night vision device. It was your night vision device on the matching 30-inch with the silvered f2.7 mirror that blew me away. Why would I want a 42 when I can get a view like that? I mean, why would I even want a 30 when I have a 16 that will be silver that can give that view, or a 25? You know, the only small bit I could point to, Ed, is that I thought the night vision views in your 24-inch f2.75, I thought, but with aluminum coatings, I thought they were really good. And I thought, you know, if I'm debating between a 25 with the NV and a 30, I'm going with the 24 or 25. So yeah, you're my reason if the 42s don't work. This is Ed Allen's fault all the way, baby.
It's all right. I volunteer that.
That's great. Lots of smiles on this end. You're a great guy, Ed. Thanks. Anyone else? No?
Oh, just quickly, Mel, what about transportation? What about that scale?
Right. I never answered your question because
Yes.
it's so important to identify you publicly as the scapegoat for this.
Yes,
So-
both, yes.
Yes. And there's no consequence to you. So you're graciously accepting that. And that's very kind. So the 30-inch, the scope weighs about 100 pounds. The mirror box is 75 pounds. With the trolley and everything put together is about 140 pounds. But the problem is I originally designed a scope with like a, quarter to half-inch clearance to fit into my Subaru Outback. But the problem is it fits, but it doesn't fit because to wiggle it in there, that's not enough clearance. The bulk has become a problem. And the bulk with the 42 compared to the 30 is going to be massively more complex. So, I don't see how to solve it except to do what you did, which is make the complete scope, make it survivable in its shape, and then get it in and out of a transport mechanism. My old 24-inch f5.5, I carried in a custom-made trailer. I made a 20-inch mirror for a friend who made me the dual action torsion spring trailer, and it was beautiful. And I would just wheel that 24-inch right out with the a winch, and I'd be up observing in 15 minutes, and I would just wheel it back in. There were times, when you go through the effort and you got so much oxygen at 3 a.m, and you look up and you go, oh, the stars are so good. Get to go back out and observe for another 45 minutes. I would do that because it was easy enough to do that. So you bring up a challenge which I didn't mention, which is that somewhere around 24 to 30 inches, you got to be coming up with transportation solutions. And I believe Chris Tribe alluded to that with his 34-inch before you build a scope. Because if you get caught with your pants down, not being able to transport the scope, well, you have a failed monster on your hands, and that is no fun.
Okay.